happening. And then we tend to do one in the fall with one of our great partners, Betsy Bishop and her team at the Vermont Chamber. Just for some clarification, this chamber it doesn't fall under the Vermont Chamber. The Vermont Chamber, as we often say, is one of 30 chambers across the state. They function just like their own organization. They have members as well, and they work on behalf of that membership, which primarily tends to be businesses. That being said, and for many of you who have been to these, we share such a great relationship with Betsy and Charles and the Vermont team. Wherever we can't kind of have our ear to the ground up in Montpelier, we feel like Betsy and her team do. We heed their advice often on an array of issues, and we'll talk about some of those issues today. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have some housekeeping that I want to go over. But just to give you a little bit of background on Betsy and Charles, Betsy Bishop is the president of the Vermont Chamber. Before joining that chamber in 2009, she was the Commissioner of Economic Development under Governor Douglas. Under her leadership, the Vermont Chamber has really focused on its mission to help its members grow and grow their businesses and the Vermont economy. As the largest statewide business organization, the Vermont Chamber represents all industries and sectors, from tourism to manufacturing to retail to healthcare and construction and technology. If I look a little distracted, I'm pushing people through the waiting room. I've got somebody calling me. There's all things going on here, but we'll get through this first part. Charles Martin joined the chamber a couple of years ago and really has been just another great partner for us, specifically here in Southwestern Vermont, and I'm sure for Betsy and her team. Charles is the Director of Government Affairs at the Vermont Chamber. His role is to coordinate member engagement on legislative issues and lobby on behalf of the Chamber's membership to further policies that address the needs of Vermont businesses and employers. Previously, he worked for U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy in both D.C. and Vermont, and the member-based National Guard Association of the United States as part of their legislative advocacy team in D.C. He also served in the Vermont Army National Guard as an intelligence officer and information operators instructor, and I'm sure he can talk about some of that experience today. I do want to represent, I'm going to try and mention as many here as I can see. I might just go through our general list just so everybody's aware of who their representative is. That may be the safest spot, but definitely for those that have hopped on the call today, I want to extend a thankful for you to take some time out of your day to meet with us as well. And that includes, we've seen Senator Campion join us. I know Senator Sears wanted to join us and couldn't. I also see Representative Mary Morrissey, who's on the call and on the phone of Bennington 2-2. She also serves as a board member of our chamber. So thank you, Mary, for the years and years of service you've given us. I don't see Nelson Brownell, but I'll mention Representative Brownell is of Bennington 1. And obviously I'm going to go through these just in the sense that it is an election season. So we want our members to be educated. Chris Bates joined us, Representative Bates of 2-1. I haven't seen Representative Corcoran, but he may be on this call as well. Representative Corcoran of Bennington 2-1. Representative Jim Carroll of Bennington 2-2. I saw Representative David Durfee down there of Bennington 3. Representative Cynthia Browning of Bennington 4, Representative Kathleen James of Bennington 4, Representative Linda Joy Sullivan of Bennington Rutland. And I was told a year or so ago, let's not forget Robin Chestnut Tangerman of Rutland Bennington, who also has some influence in our region as well. So if they've hopped on the call, thank you all for joining us. I also invited some of the candidates. I thought it would be a good foray for them to get into some of our discussion as it pertains to business, economic development, and tourism. So I wanted to have them join us as well. That invite went out to Mike Hall, who's running for state Senate for Bennington County, Meg Hansen, who is also running for Senate race for Bennington County. I see Seth Bongartz and he's running for representative in Bennington 4 up in Manchester. Dane Whitman is running as representative in Bennington 2-1, and Michael Nigro is joining us running as a representative in Bennington 2-2. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And when's the time to vote? What date? What's the date to vote?
November 3rd.
November 3rd, everybody.
November
So,
3rd.
at the very least,
Next
if you take
Tuesday.
nothing away from today, make sure you get out and vote November 3rd. Some housekeeping. If you're not on mute, please move yourself to mute. If you're not talking at the moment, that just helps us facilitate these Zoom calls effectively. We're on here for about an hour and a half, and so I'll kick off with some questions for Betsy and Charles to get us warmed up. Hopefully you've all brought some questions. Please utilize the chat bar if you need to, but also a wave of your hand or put up the hand sign, the digital hand. I will try to scroll through multiple columns of this panel to call on you or just speak up. But let's try and follow some of those rules. It can get confusing on these Zoom calls. I think everybody's been on them enough to know the rules of the road and what makes an effective meeting. And we only have Betsy and Charles for just a limited amount of time. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to our chamber membership for joining us. We're excited to get into kind of a fall review and the future in 2021. And I see Senator Dick Sears is joining us. So Senator Sears is going to hop on in just a minute, and we thank Dick for hopping on. Betsy, maybe we start off with you. Give us an overview of the economy as you see it right now. What does 2021 look like for you and your team?
Sure. So thank you for having me, and what a great collection of folks you've got here. It does feel a little bit like election season. Glad to see so many representatives and candidates and senators on the call. We had a virtual policy series yesterday with Secretary of State Jim Condos, just talking about voting and making sure that everybody has a voting plan, and it was something that I hadn't really heard, the voting plan. So I'm going to just start this off with a little bit of interaction, and I encourage you to type into the chat, either I voted or I have a plan to vote. And just let us know how you're doing. The notion here is, as Matt said, it's November 3rd. It's important that you vote. That's what we're all on. I would expect almost everybody here has already done that because of the topic today. So I'm hoping that that is, an indication of your interaction. And so what we're hoping to do today is talk a little bit about some of the issues around the economy. And what businesses are seeing and feeling more specifically. So I'm fond of saying that during COVID, my job has changed so much that it's hard for me to remember what my job was pre-COVID. And because since COVID has happened, this is all we do now, is inform, understand, advocate, urge. We always have done that, but even more so now. And I imagine many of you feel the same way, that COVID has really changed your lives. And so when we're talking about economy, I want to think about it in a couple of different ways. There is your own personal individual economy and how that is happening. There is the business economy, how individual businesses are thriving or not. There's the community, whether that's the Bennington area or the Manchester area, or perhaps the community that I more represent is the state of Vermont, which in and of itself is a small community as well. And I don't think I'm going to tell you anything here that you don't know already, but within this COVID economy that we're living through, I think we all thought that this started out in March, and we all thought it would last a couple of months and then we'd be back to normal. And as the date of the emergency order has been extended, as we've all gotten accustomed to, as Senator Campion had mentioned, the governor's weekly or biweekly press conferences telling us where we are, there's a bit of pride in Vermont for our low COVID rates. And that is something that I think we all treasure as individuals, as businesses, as communities, that we really are pulling together to make sure that Vermont is doing the right thing. But that's not without pain. And we're seeing that pain on the individual level as people's jobs people were either furloughed or laid off, or in some instances gone altogether. We've seen that with businesses. Vermont is made up of small businesses across the board. We have very few large corporations. So when Matt says, the Vermont Chamber has its own membership and it mostly represents business, that's absolutely true, but all the businesses that we represent are the small businesses on every main street in in Vermont, and frankly in some of the hinterlands as well. But they're all just very small businesses struggling to survive always. And now with COVID, it's just created another level of difficulty and pain. And I'm fond of saying that the pain is so wide and so deep that although there's been some really aggressive and great work done at the federal level and at our state legislature level, there's no amount of money that can fill the hole that has been created for individuals, for businesses, for municipalities, for our healthcare system. And so it's a matter of doing as best as we can. I think in Vermont, we're really fortunate that we have a legislative process and an administration that's very close to the people. It's part of our rurality. It's part of our smallness, if you will, that you can reach out and touch your representatives. I think Matt's put together a really great program here where a lot of representatives are on this. But I think we've seen in the headlines, and certainly probably in your own communities, we've seen a lot of difficulty expressed around the lodging and hospitality industry, specifically the restaurants as well. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're asking people not to travel here, right? So we are an economy that tourism is really the one of the three big industries in Vermont, employing over 32,000 people, bringing in about $2 billion of economic transactions, bringing in quite a bit of revenue to the state. And we, summer, fall, winter, we're now four-season place for tourism. And to be able to say to people, well, we don't want you to be here, has been really difficult. And I think your experience is probably our experience in the sense that we know that they're still coming, right? We see them in the towns. We see them standing in line for takeout at your favorite restaurant. So, interestingly, that many are still coming. Certainly not as many as usually do, and our COVID rates have stayed particularly low. But some of the things that we are trying to do and some of the things that we've done is really, in addition to the hospitality industry, lodging has been hit particularly hard. If you think about a lodging establishment, whether that's a small B&B or a larger hotel, they have a huge capital investment in that facility. And knowing that occupancy was, at 50% or less for over the summer and most of the fall was really difficult. So we put together an effort to really push for 100% occupancy in the lodging community. We did that by creating a special phone call with the health department, specifically Dr. Patsy Kelso, with the governor's office, with the economic development office, and really spent time explaining to them how 100% occupancy in a hotel room is not where the COVID outbreaks are going to be. Generally speaking, when you all vacation somewhere, you're staying in a hotel room with somebody you previously knew, right? You're not staying in a hotel room with random strangers for the most part. So that is often a place where you can stay and not be mingling with the public. We brought some data to the table, and we were able to help push that to 100% occupancy. Even with that being lifted and allowing 100% occupancy in lodging, there's not 100% occupancy going on, but it does enable them to try to get a few more people. Meanwhile, in all the common areas, it is still less occupancy where you might, in the hotel's lobby or in the hotel's restaurant, being able to think about that distancing as needed. I think overall from the business community, what I'm hearing is we get it. We're doing our part. We understand. We will obey. And I think that's good. We're seeing that from the majority of businesses, and I think that's also contributing to our low rates of COVID spread. But it's not that they love it, because it is hurting them as well. And so that dual effort of doing the right thing but being harmed is really hard. And as we see the economy going forward and sort of looking ahead, where is this going to go? In March, I think we all thought this was going to be a couple of months, and then the summer came, and it was like, well, maybe by the time we go back to school in the fall, we'll be over this. And now we're looking ahead, and we're thinking, even though we feel that a vaccine might be on the verge of coming, we also know that we're really talking about all of 2021. And so what does another summer and fall look like? So our advocacy at the state level and at the federal level has really been about how do we help these businesses? How do we support them with grant funding? So those are things that we have worked on. Many of you know about the grant funding pieces. We'll be glad to get into the details of those. Just so you have a perspective of that, I know all the legislators on the call already know this, but due to Senator Leahy's tenure in the Senate, he's a super advocate for all of us here in Vermont, and they have something at the federal level called a small state minimum. So when they're parsing out very large billions of dollars at the federal level, there are a lot of small states that, if you were to think about a percentage, might get smaller dollars. But the small state minimum for the COVID Relief Act was $1.25 billion. To put that in perspective, our entire state budget is $6 billion. So Vermont got a huge amount of money. I talked to my counterparts in other states, and they might have gotten more than that small state minimum, but it's just such a smaller percentage, and they cannot help regular businesses the way that we have. So there has been an advantage to Vermont in that way. That's not to say that businesses still don't need more, but that has really helped both the federal level PPP and EIDL loans, as well as the state grants. And the legislature put that out in two different slogs of money. The first that was available in June, and now the second that is open right now. It's all part of that same federal grant funding. But that has been a huge help. And we've been at the table advocating for making sure that businesses have their share of those funds to help them through this COVID time. The one other thing that I think I'd like to talk about just in the opening, and then Charles, we can have you talk about some of the specifics, and then Matt, open it up to any questions that you want. I'd really like to talk about working from home and the impact that that's having in Vermont. I spend my days talking to business owners, leadership folks in various businesses, whether that's a business owner or a CEO or a general manager of a plant, and really trying to understand how this all is impacting them in very different ways. And, we know that lodging and restaurant businesses were hit really hard. Certainly high-touch businesses, salons, massage therapists, those types of folks, gymnasiums, those are all being hit hard because of the proximity of people. But as I dig a little bit deeper in the economy, and I probably have 5 or 6 Zoom calls a week with business owners, I'm getting a really good sense of what's working and what's not. So it's interesting to say this, but there are some businesses that are booming in COVID, and that hurts to say in some places when you know that other businesses like lodging and restaurant are not. But if you've been to a hardware store or a farm and garden store, there's hardly anything that they can sell you anymore. Apparently all Vermonters decided that this was the year to repaint their house or build a chicken coop or something. And so it's been a lot of activity in those particular areas. Certainly real estate. I think when we were first getting on the call, we talked about the real estate boom, and Southern Vermont is really a lot of is being reported about Southern Vermont, but I will tell you that it's happening in our Northeast Kingdom, our least populated area of the state as well. Real estate prices are rising and people are getting full price offers. And so we're seeing that all over the state, even though we mostly hear about it being reported from Southern Vermont. Manufacturing has been hit in different ways. It really depends on what you're manufacturing, but most of them were considered essential employers, and so they were able to stay on and do well. Some, in Vermont, we've got a pretty good medical supply manufacturing system here, and so quite a few of those were doing well. Interestingly, I've talked to lawyers, CPAs, and insurance companies as well, and I don't think they're either hurt or booming. They're just ticking right along. Apparently, we still all need legal advice and accounting and insurance. So it's just, it's never one thing in Vermont. And I think that has always helped us in the past when we've been through recession or difficult times. We're not just one thing. We're many, many things. And that will add to our resiliency as we try to climb out of this. In the working from home piece, anybody who was working in a professional office that could work from home, we were all sort of said to go and do that. And I look out at this Zoom gallery here and I see what I think is many of you working from home. I can't always tell, but certainly thinking about that. And I think what that's brought to light is that we can do this. I believe that we can use this moment in time to make Vermont the work from home capital of the universe. I feel like we have so many assets in Vermont. You know what those assets are. We have these awesome downtowns that are thriving. We have incredible recreational assets. We have so many things going for us that people come here for as a tourist, but have never thought about really moving here. And I think now we can position ourselves because we've had a forced experiment that has worked. Without fail, every business owner that I talk to that have sent their employees to work from home, it is working in the vast majority of circumstances. There's always a few people that need a special accommodation, and employers are doing that. And I think previously we used to think employers didn't trust their employees or didn't think they were as productive or whatever. We have blown past all of that. We are seeing productivity, we're seeing energy, and we're at the point now where employers are thinking, well, post-COVID, do we come back to the office? My worry about that is if we don't, I think about the communities that these offices are in and how they rely on those types of office workers. So I think there's change coming in that part of the economy as well. In order to be a true work from home capital of the universe, I think we really need to focus on three things that we have been focusing on for years in the policy realm. That's broadband, that's childcare, and that's housing. And we can get into any of those. I don't think we should wait until all those things are perfect before we start to talk about Vermont as the work from home capital of the world. But I think those are things that need constant attention. So I'm going to stop there. And Matt, I don't know if you want to go to you and then Charles or Charles.
Yeah, let's just go over to Charles. Charles, if you want to add anything, the one question I'd kind of frame it up in, in terms of looking at what's next, we can kind of do an overview of what has happened so far with grants and federal aid and kind of where are we at today, what are we looking at into the future. Obviously, the federal Senate just went on vacation, sounds like. Yep. So what does that mean for those businesses and communities needing desperate support?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So over the summer and to this point, the legislature, as far as sort of direct business relief grants go, advanced about $230 million in funding. And that's sort of the grant programs that we're probably, most folks on this call are familiar with, that ACCD and the Department of Taxes is administering based on losses from previous years and unmet need from this year. So that was quite a Herculean effort. To put that in perspective, I think the Agency of Commerce and Community Development usually has about $1 million annually in grant funds that they push out. So you're talking about a 230-fold increase to that size with no staffing increase to that agency and no staffing increase to the committees of jurisdiction in the legislature that make decisions about those bills. So it really is sort of a praiseworthy, significant effort that went on this summer, and definitely could not have occurred to the tune that it did without a lot of input from the business community. So that's sort of what has happened. Sort of the lingering question now is what will happen for follow-on federal relief. I think there's consensus in the current administration in the White House, in the majorities and minorities in the House and Senate at the federal level, that there needs to be an additional bill passed. There's some kind of chatter right now that there's a $1.8 trillion bill that the Trump administration would like to advance, but I got off the phone a little while ago with Senator Leahy's staff, and I think the consensus in DC is there's so much daylight between the proposal that the current president would like to advance and what some of the majority in the House and the minority in the Senate would like to advance, that it really can't be viewed as like a bill that's prepared to be passed as soon as the election's over. There's going to need to be a lot more negotiation that goes on with that bill, and that's going to take a little bit of time. So as far as managing expectations, I think the next round of relief to the state probably would not be here until early winter. And Betsy mentioned small state minimums, which is incredible. It really was. I mean, to put it in a different way of looking at it, New Yorkers received a few hundred dollars per citizen, if you want to do the math on it that way, and Vermonters received a few $1,000s per citizen, if you want to frame small states minimum that way. And that really is something we're so thankful for to our congressional delegation. But to manage expectations on that as well, it looks like the last time around the legislature received $1.25 billion. Right now, appropriators on the Democrat side in the Senate are thinking that would be more around $500 million, so $500 million next time around. And why that kind of impacts, you know, the chamber world in two ways, and I think the representatives and senators on the call can agree with this. When and if that money does advance, will really determine a lot of the work the legislature does when they return to Montpelier this winter, because it's obviously a big undertaking to figure out where $500 million ends up going. And if that decision is left up to the legislature, there'll be a lot of work that our elected officials will have to do this year to decide placement.
Great. I just want to open it up to Dick or Brian first, and then to representatives. Any, you guys have been in an unprecedented year, and I think, everybody on this call owes a round of applause, but we'll do it silently because it's a Zoom call to the work that you all have done, especially for Southern Vermont. Dick, Brian, others, just weigh in on kind of what Charles just talked about. Where have we gone with the billions, and where are we heading with a possible new round?
Well, I just thank you, Matt, for the comments, and Betsy and Charles, thanks for the update. I will only say that, Charles, I hope we're back in Montpelier, but I have my doubts.
Yeah, virtually, I suppose I should have said.
I think it's a long shot that the legislature will be able to meet in Montpelier on a regular basis. I believe but what we're looking at is around $100 million deficit if we don't get any federal help in the 2022 budget, and that's an astounding number when you think about what you'd have to do. And the latest that I have on the financial side from the administration is looking at level funding everything. They've asked the various departments of state government to come back with a plan that would level fund, and then hopefully they don't have to look at dramatic cuts again. But again, making up $100 million would not be easy in general fund money. I expect that Congress will pass something, but I would also remind that we need flexibility because a number of the grants that we put out to businesses, individuals, etc., have a December 30th, the money has to be used by then. And if it isn't, it might get clawed back to the feds. So we're hoping that the Congress, I guess it would be a lame duck session now that the Senate has gone home, that Congress would have provisions in the bill that would allow for greater flexibility on the $1.25 billion that was already allocated. Because I suspect a lot of those funds are not going to go out the door. in time. So that's one thing that I would look for. The Joint Fiscal Committee, which I'm a member of, has continued to meet and will be meeting again shortly to try to approve new grants and new funding streams and the uses of the 1.25. And we keep getting conflicting information. But without another influx of federal funds, we're in big trouble, I would say. And that doesn't, I would like to emphasize how great the response has been, particularly from the lodging industry down here in Bennington County and in Wilmington. And you, Matt, and other members of the chamber have done a great job of organizing and making sure that we understand the challenges. But I was just looking at the new travel map for Vermont today. And when you look at that map, the places where people can come to visit Vermont from are dwindling rapidly. And I was trying to think of how could you get somebody from basically Maine is what's left, and parts of Maine are also closed off. So here we are competing with one of our northern New England neighbors to fill our motels and restaurants and so forth. So that is a huge problem in terms of as the COVID-19 cases continue to rise in the surrounding states. And I would point out Bennington County is, I think, number 2 in the state in terms of per capita cases, which is a little scary as well. So looking at the map, I'm really worried about our lodging industry.
Can I add a point there? I thank you for that, Senator Sears, because I think the lodging industry is difficult, and the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes to bridge that, for sure. Just a point for that map. I think the way that we've chosen coloring on that map, it makes Vermont look maybe more amazing even than it is. Yes, we have the lowest cases, but if we were to use the red, yellow, and green coloring in Vermont, 3 of our counties we would not be able to travel from. So, when you look at that map, you feel that everybody outside of Vermont needs to stay away. If you use that same logic, we would be saying that you would also have to stay away from residents in 3 different counties. So the number that Vermont has chosen to color that map is exceptionally low. And that number was picked arbitrarily. And so I think that it has held us in good stead, but it's worth noting that the map itself is difficult to swallow.
If I might just break in terms of the restaurant industry, I've had a number of discussions with people about the ability of folks to come over here and shop and do things. As you know, Bennington County, a large amount of the workforce actually lives in Rensselaer County, New York, which is a red area. So they're here anyway, working and so forth. So why shouldn't they be able to go to lunch here?
Well, and what's interesting is they are here. I've heard reports from Woodstock and Stowe and various, Manchester high-level tourism towns that are saying, the tourists are here, and our rates of spread have been relatively low, even though they are coming. I think the other point I wanted to make for the businesses on the call, when Senator Sears, you mentioned that the funds have to be used by 12/31 and that we need flexibility from the feds, we would 100% agree with that flexibility need. For businesses, for the business grant portion of that, I just want to remind people that it doesn't need to be spent by 12/31 because of the way the business grants have been done. They are looking at your loss and your unmet need. And if you've proven that you've had that loss and they give you a grant, that grant is only filling that loss. Therefore, you've already lost it. So it's just helping you fill that bucket. There's no need to spend that money. In other areas like in healthcare and higher education, they do, the 1231 is an expenditure thing, but I just wanted to clarify with that, with how the business grants are being done. I see we're getting a couple of questions, Matt. Do you want to go to those, or?
Yeah, I just want to provide an opportunity for Senator Campion to weigh in on some of what you've said already, and then even some representatives. Let's not, get carried away, but if you have something of value or a nuance that you want to add that you've been working on in the last session around that, please do. And obviously we'll continue to bring you into some of the question and answer period.
Sure, thanks, Matt. And thanks, Betsy and Charlie. I appreciate Matt's partnership during all of this, all of our local businesses, as well as John Shanahan, who does a lot for our downtown. Everyone's partnership during this entire process has been incredible. I also appreciate what the administration has done. I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing this uptick in real estate, is people feel they can come to this state and be safe, and there's transparency around information, et cetera. So I applaud all those involved. I'll just be brief. I think for me, I serve on finance. We have played a role in creating the CUDs, the communication union districts. I fully agree with Betsy and others that have talked about this state being a place to work remote. And I think we really have a real possibility of doing that. We need to continue to invest in high-speed internet, and that means fiber. And I think the CUDs are well positioned to do this, but we have to continue to put dollars into this. I also completely agree with those that have talked about childcare. It's going to provide it. I mean, without a doubt, we want young families to come to this state, and young families are going to have children with them. And how can we provide affordable childcare? And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but we know that communities throughout this state, this country, as well as Canada, our neighbors to the north that have done it, it has brought families to certain areas. So I think we have to continue in that direction. Trying to think, I guess the other piece that I just would emphasize now and then turn it back to others is, our recreational opportunities is in this state, I think, and I guess I look to others to confirm this or not, but I feel like it continues to be, a boom industry. I mean, I look at our local golf courses that are full, people are outside enjoying themselves. We did in Act 250, we did expand, recreational trails. We gave them an exemption from Act 250, although the governor vetoed that. He did put it in his executive order. Expanding trails and trail use is going to be important to our, economic development going forward. So I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to mention the broadband. Childcare, without a doubt, is essential, and continue to emphasize our outdoor and recreational activities.
Great, and I think a lot of people that saw the Bennington banner today, the Chamber and our partners were fortunate to be awarded 5 different marketing grants. A lot of that will go towards really, what we haven't been able to do in at least my time, which is to mobilize our recreational assets and kind of package them and frame them up with some superlatives specific to Southwestern Vermont. And we hope to do the same with retail and lodging and culture and other attractions. So we're, again, very fortunate for some of the money that came down from the feds and then into the state and then through a lot of those grant opportunities. So we'll be seeing more of that even in the next 30 days from this chamber and our partners. I want to just give an opportunity for Representative Bates or Durfee or James, and a couple others are on this, just anything to add of value at the current moment, and then we'll start to look at some of these questions in the chat, or if people want to raise their hands. Okay, well, we'll go through some of the questions, and if you, Representative Durfee, get your hand raised.
Well, I hate to be the only one, and I don't want to stand in the way of hearing from the other guests, but I just wanted to give a quick sort of PSA for the hazard pay program, because I'm not sure that Charles mentioned that. The second round is starting off tomorrow. And I know I was on a call yesterday with helping a client, a webinar that the agency did, and businesses who have certain types of businesses with essential workers who had elevated exposure or the potential for could qualify for that. And you can get started on it today. The application doesn't actually open until tomorrow, but there is some pre-work you can do, and it's a first come, first serve program. So just if anybody on the call might qualify for that.
Great, thank you. And I see Representative James, you also mentioned the technical assistance program. I think some people are looking to reinvent and repurpose, and that's a great program through our local Regional Development Corporation. Jonathan Cooper is the contact there for this grant, but that will provide you some grant funding for other technical assistance that doesn't, can be everything from an architect to web design, marketing, specific types of bookkeeping and accounting. Anything you want to add to that, Representative James?
The unmuting sometimes takes a minute. Not about that program, because it's all available on the webpage, and I think and hope it's going to be a useful program to people. I just only wanted to say, we were talking about the session upcoming, and I only wanted to reflect that, if reelected, one of the things that I think has been so remarkable about the weeks and months that we've just passed is one of the ways in which my job has shifted, and I think would shift in the upcoming session, is the increased focus, or I guess the increased urgency of helping businesses and constituents connect to programs like this. And I just think it's so important. In the session ahead, a lot is going to hinge on whether we get federal assistance. I think so much of the legislature's work is going to focus on the budget and on state programs. And one of the ways in which I've been spending so much of my time, and I think every senator and legislator on this call will probably nod their heads. It's really important that we help our constituents and businesses learn about these programs that are out there, because we're getting the press releases, we're sitting in these kinds of Zoom meetings all the time, and we hear from the chamber. We have access to these programs. We have access to information, and it's just I don't know. I found it to be a vital part of my job that you get these links, you hear about these programs that people and businesses might not be hearing about, and it's important. So anyway, I just wanted to add that plug out there, that serving as a conduit, I guess, between the state and organizations like the Chamber and organizations like the BCRC is a way in which we can be really useful, maybe even more so than ever before.
Yeah, Representative Carroll and I were talking about that before others got on the call. Just an opportunity, but also I don't think anything that really any of our organizations or even you running signed up for initially. But again, an amazing opportunity with a lot of money and a lot of opportunity to help people. So I know, we're happy to serve, but it did kind of throw, as Betsy said, she didn't even remember her job before March. So
and I'm just going to add something, Representative James. You're absolutely right. We've all turned into COVID experts and connecting people. There's so many resources, and I think as a group of chambers of commerce across the state, Matt had mentioned that there's 30 chambers across the state, and one of the things that I've noticed to a T with every single one is that they've all moved from sort of a member service model to communicating about these programs with everyone and anyone they can. There's there's no longer this notion of, I'm only going to communicate this to my members. I'm going to communicate this to everybody who absolutely needs this. Now, of course, we still need members to pay dues so that we can continue to do that. So we're thankful that businesses can do that. But, you know, this is an extraordinary time. And I think the great thing about the Chamber Network is I've really seen them step up. I think what Matt's doing in the whole Bennington County is just is really indicative of what we're seeing around the state. So I think that that's just a pitch for your local and regional chambers. They're really super important.
Representative Carroll, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Betsy and Charles. You know, I've been communicating with a constituent who works for Frito-Lay, and the parent company is PepsiCo. And he cautioned me that PepsiCo would possibly not comply with applying for hazard pay. And he confirmed that in an email to me today. And I wonder if the chamber can help me out with getting people like PepsiCo. And this particular individual is a frontline worker who delivered wholesale to groceries all over southern Vermont. And I would imagine there are many other Frito-Lay representatives throughout the state who are deserving of that hazard pay, and PepsiCo is being uncooperative.
Representative Carroll, offline, I'll follow up with you on that, see what we can do.
Very good, thank you.
Great. We have some questions that have come up in the comment bar, and again, either write a question in the comment bar or hold a hand up or a digital hand, and I'll try to call on you. But we've got a couple here that I think we should get to. John Burnham, new director over at the Manchester Business Association. Welcome, John. Had a question on consumer retail and bar and restaurants, really around the idea of, you know, why are we still at 50% capacity? And I think the end of his question is kind of the most intriguing, which is, as we get colder here in Vermont and restaurants are forced and dining establishments are forced to move back inside, what does that look like for everyone?
Yeah, I think I can speak to this. We have had, I can't even count how many discussions with, I will say, the powers that be on this. And those powers are really the governor's chief of staff, the secretary of the Agency of Commerce, and Dr. Kelsas and Levine. We have had some very difficult discussions around this with them. They very much understand what the industry wants. And they very much want to go there as well. What the desire is, where the path is on restaurants and bars specifically, is to simplify the guidance. So to remove the percentages so that you wouldn't have 50%, 75%, 100%. There just would be no percent. That's where they want to go. And at the same time, the 6-foot distancing would stay. And so you can imagine in any restaurant or bar setting that if you remove the percentage, but you leave the 6-foot distancing, that is going to regulate how many people, and few people would get to 100% occupancy in that scenario. That is the next step for restaurants and bars, John. But we've been talking about this move for 4 weeks now. And at the beginning of the school year, the conversation was, yes, this is next. We have to see how school goes. For one, it was difficult for me to understand how activity at bars and restaurants would be coupled with school openings. But I think I understand the concept now. We were hoping that there would be no uptick as college students came back, as primary and middle school, secondary schools came back in. And with each week, as we started to see a few cases coming up in clusters around the state, each time you see that, it pushes back that announcement on restaurants and bars until that calms down. So if you think about those two things on a leverage point, that's what's happening. So that's, whether that's good news or not, I think that's the pressure point there. The other place that we've really pushed for in the restaurant, we've been working with, there's a new group called the Vermont Independent Restaurant Association, and we've entered into a formal partnership with them. The other place that they're really asking for our help is to understand if we could have physical barriers in restaurants and bars in lieu of 6-foot distancing. The answer to that from the Vermont Health Department has been unequivocally no. And so there were a lot of imaginings going on in this space. What if I put floor-to-ceiling plexiglass between my booths, my tables, my bar seating, whatever? Would that suffice? And the answer to that is no. There has been no guidance across the country, or quite frankly, the world, where physical barriers reduce the spread of COVID as effectively as 6-foot distancing. My team has been hunting for that scientific evidence, and we have been asking for every restaurant who reads everything, if you find that, let us know, because that's something that our health department needs to see. We haven't found that yet, so I'm just putting that out there. I've got like all these restaurants as researchers, right? So I'm continually asking for that, but those are the avenues that we've been trying to get, and those are the reasonings. I hope that helps answer that question.
Andrew McKeever, you had a similar question. I hope that answered it. Is there a tipping point to where we could see a return to the lockdown days of earlier this spring coming November and December that businesses would have to negotiate? But Betsy or Charles, any feeling, or really any legislator on the call, any feeling that, you know, as potential spikes happen as we get closer to indoors, another mandatory lockdown?
I think that the governor and probably the whole population would like to avoid another lockdown, right? There's nobody that wants to go through that again. And I think some of what we're experiencing is COVID fatigue. I certainly have Zoom fatigue. I don't know about you. I'll give you a little Zoom hint for anybody who hasn't learned this one. The 3 dots on the upper right of your thing, if you click over that, you can see that there's a hide self view. So it's awesome. You don't have to see yourself for an hour and a half, and it simulates a meeting where you go to a meeting. We don't have mirrors around a conference room. We're always looking at ourselves. So I've been putting that on, and it's sort of that hide self view sort of saves a little Zoom fatigue. But I think when we're thinking about a lockdown, I think people still feel that they are maybe not completely locked down, but they're certainly not at normalcy. There are many people doing self-curbing of their behaviors. And so I think nobody wants to see that. And that tipping point has to do with how many cases we see and spikes. I think if you listen very carefully to the governor and Dr. Levine, when those spikes come, they're talking very specifically about them being very clustered in a very specific area due to an event, rather than widespread in the community. I think if you see that change, that would be that tipping point.
Matt, if I just might quickly, I've been kind of following what happened at Central Vermont Memorial Civic Center, which is a hockey rink in Montpelier, and the response from the state to that, and knowing that hockey rinks are notoriously small, poor air ventilation, because you're, making sure you can ice up a rink and all that stuff. I think that's instructive. You had a case there where they're trying now to limit hockey rinks. That affects us down here with the Riley rink in Manchester. But I think that's instructive of what you might see in the future as you see a particular facility. We just had, I just got notice today that the middle school, I think you got it yesterday, the Mount Anthony Middle School is going back to remote classes. So cases come up, and an abundance of caution. So I'm worried about the restaurant industry, particularly as people are asked to go inside. Right now, I noticed a lot of places where they have decks and outside. I don't know if you're seeing that up north where it's gotten colder, but I know I go by the deck at the public house, for example, and it's usually full of people right now, and other places where they have outside. I'm worried about the inside dining and what will happen to that restaurant.
Yeah, I will say that I know that you're in southern Vermont, and I know it's, you know, a tinge warmer, but you're still going to get all the snow and be plenty cold. But yeah, I think we are seeing that there's been a lot of purchasing of outdoor heaters. There's a shortage in the supply chain of those as well. And those are extending that. But we're starting to see people pack up their outdoor decks because they'll have to do that, like if they're in parklets on the streets and that for plowing purposes. So we're starting to see that. Restaurants are getting very nervous about, even if you move the 100%, but keep the 6 foot, I'm never going to get to 100%. So there's some hand wringing around that. And some people are doing some financial calculations about, you know, how much money do I lose if I stay open versus close and then reemerge in the spring when it's warmer again. So there's some discussion about that. I really worry about restaurants that think about closing for 3 or 4 months because I think it'll take a Herculean effort to reopen. And I worry about the health of that industry.
Art Grill, you had a question when we open it up, and I'm opening it up to you now. So Art, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I know we're trying to, you know, booster this work from home workforce, and as housing prices increase, I'm just concerned that when things start to return to, and I would say normal, but we don't really know what normal will be. What efforts are we making to try to increase the actual labor force? I'm concerned that our labor force is actually dwindling right now as housing prices increase and people are selling and moving, that we're going to end up in a worse problem than we were prior to COVID with actual labor.
Yeah, let me speak briefly about what we're doing at the Chamber, and it's very slight, Art, and you know some of it, but definitely around the State-to-Stay program is looking to be rebooted as a digital experience first. So we are working with ACCD and the Department of Tourism on virtual stay-to-stays and how to even break people out. And, you know, Jen and others can speak to virtual showings of houses, but something along those lines. Recently, when Stay-to-Stay did kind of get dormant, we did partner with the Vermont Welcome Wagon, and now there is a Southern Vermont Welcome Wagon chapter that Jonathan Cooper and I manage over here, along with Alex, who's on this call, Figueroa, and Sarah Lang and her team, Casey, over there in Wyndham. And, you know, again, small little things, but I think, you know, one part of our vision is exactly what you're talking about, which, you know, there's some these huge kind of macroeconomic things that are happening in Bennington County and throughout, and then what are some of the microeconomic things, which is, you know, the one-to-one touch that Stay-to-Stay just in its first couple of years really started to gain some traction. We saw over 100 people come through Bennington County alone, and we have probably moved about 12 people here over that time as well. And there are a handful others now with COVID on their mind who are aggressively looking at Vermont, and they all went through the program back when Vermont and the world was completely safe. So, you know, I think there are efforts like that. They seem a little bit more nuanced or more detail focused and a little bit like, man, bringing in 2 or 3 families at a time. But, you know, that's how human beings work. So it takes time for them to mature their decision about moving all the way from, we have a couple coming from Santa Rosa, California, and they've been all throughout Vermont, and we're going to meet with them on Friday. So there are efforts like that. I think, Art, to your point, they need to happen faster, and there probably need to be more workforce. But those are at least some efforts that this local chamber is working on. Betsy, other thoughts that you have around increasing?
And Matt, do you mind if I actually just jump in also whenever?
Yep.
You want to talk about workforce? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask if I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not Art's thinking, particularly around, certain folks coming in that are trained to do certain, positions, or just general in terms of workforce. Because I do think the demographic piece is, and I don't want to just keep going back to this, but I can't emphasize enough how important broadband and our expansion is, as well as I think the childcare issue in terms of attracting folks. With regard to affordable housing, I do think Vermont does, at least in this region, I think we are doing a solid job. It can be improved. One of the things I personally would like to just put out there is we also have housing stock that I'd like to see improved. In other words, sometimes new construction is the right way to go, but I know in some of our downtown areas throughout the state, it would be great to invest in some of the housing stock that needs to be renovated. I know our local hospital did a great job with some of that, and it would be interesting to see if we could focus on that. But so I think, my question just for Art is he looking specifically, just generally in terms of demographics, or specific training? And in that way, I'd be curious to know if Representative James on the House Education Committee could say something about workforce training.
Yeah, I'm actually talking about, entry-level positions. So it seems like, across the board, everybody was struggling with finding those entry-level people to come in.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is some of the people that we were bringing in prior with, with no experience in that entry-level position now are not coming in as much to the area, because they're now seeing that, it's become more expensive, or some of them that owned homes in the area are putting them up for sale because those homes now are worth more to them.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
And so I know it's kind of a catch-22. We're getting something that we desperately need, and we're losing something that we desperately need. So, and I don't have an answer. I'm just kind of curious if there's any, thought or plans. And I know Matt's done some great things with the, with the Stay and Stay program. I'm just curious, at a state level, are we looking at that entry-level workforce, and how are we going to bolster that? Because with all these new people coming in that are going to telecommute, most of them are in that, that middle to higher paying jobs.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point.
And they're going to require a lot of these services that are performed by entry-level people that I don't know if we have the workforce to support. I don't want to see these people come in, stay 6 months, and leave,
right,
because we can't support that level.
And I think there is a training component to that. And I don't know if Representative James, as the House Education, has anything to add to that piece.
Yeah, sorry about the phone ringing. I can chime in just a little bit, which is to say that one of the projects I'm working on is I am serving on the Select Committee for the Future of Public Higher Ed, and we're a task force that is taking a look at the crisis that's facing the Vermont state colleges right now. And that task force is focusing very strongly on workforce development statewide, and trying to take a very hard look at linking up the Vermont state colleges to our workforce needs, not only for entry-level folks coming right out of undergrad, but also at adults, and trying to make sure that we're doing a better job of bringing adults back to school, folks that have maybe lost their job due to COVID, that want to return to the workforce, maybe adults that are working, that want to return to school to pursue a career that is higher paying, and also looking not even necessarily at four-year degrees, but connecting with a lot of the work that Advance Vermont is doing in terms of credentials, stackable things where you can start with a credential and get something that is just a credential or or certificate, and you start building those things so that you move through and start stacking up credentials in your life that move you into higher and higher paying jobs. So that committee is working now. Our report on the state colleges is due in April. And like I said, we are taking a hard look at workforce connection and workforce pipeline issues as part of that work. So I hope that's kind of a partial issue to that question.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of it, is training and upskilling and creating that ladder of growth. I think one thing that's difficult sometimes to talk about in the sort of policy perspective is if you actually look at our workforce and look at the amount of jobs that we have that do not require higher education, it's huge. So if you think about this more like a pyramid, right? There's a lot of people who just have a high school degree and have not gone on anywhere up that ladder. And certainly the credentialing piece that is happening here is really helpful. But I think only 24% of the jobs available, of the jobs in Vermont, not available, but the jobs in Vermont need a 4-year degree. And that is hard for elected leaders and leaders of chambers of commerce to actually grapple with, because we want everybody to have a 4-year degree and we want everybody to be working to their maximum potential and having high salaries. But the truth of the matter is we also need a lot of entry-level workers that are in relatively low skill or no skill jobs. And there is a place in every economy for those. The trick is not to stay in that entry-level job. And that's the ladder that Representative James talks about. But we should, I think, Art, you had mentioned, how do we get these people to Vermont? If we just tell people to come here and work from home, it doesn't help the workforce issue. Absolutely true. But there's very little effort or will to suggest, hey, come to Vermont for an entry-level job. I think we could tie that to what we need and then fill that pipeline and create that ladder. But we as a society have to be accepting that some jobs, many jobs in Vermont, 74% of jobs in Vermont don't require a multi-year degree. And while that's an economic development thing that we need to work on to recruit more businesses that have higher paying jobs, this is the reality that we have. We held a phone call with a handful of manufacturers a couple of weeks ago who are struggling to hire workers, entry-level workers into manufacturing, paying decent wages and decent benefits. I got off the phone yesterday with a CEO of a janitorial company. They are paying starting wages of $15 an hour, and they are giving bonuses for the end of projects. So for instance, in a higher education goes home at Thanksgiving. If you come and work for them, and then you make it to the end, they give you a bonus. People are not staying for that. They don't care. They're leaving in the middle of that job. That, and yet everybody wants, added cleaning and more janitorial services. Might not be the job that you're thinking for your kid, but these are things that have to happen in every economy. So it's hard to grapple with because we do like talking about sort of those higher level jobs, but it's something that we do have to focus on.
Betsy, I think I'll add to that a little bit as well. I'm currently working on sort of a statewide map to help communicate this. I think sort of the goalpost and what folks talk about often is $15 an hour as a nice target for an entry-level wage or low skills wage. So that's the target that I'm working with. But what we're trying to do is quantify that there are jobs with a base pay of $15 an hour or above for entry-level workers and benefits as well in virtually every county in Vermont. And we understand that at this point anecdotally, but I'm trying to create a sort of a master spreadsheet that proves that so that we can hopefully better, as Betsy mentioned, market the state as a place where all job categories, advanced degrees, entry level or technical degrees are sort of seen as existing here, because there really is, Art's correct. It's an absolute shortage of entry level or even, skilled worker non-4-year degree jobs like Betsy mentioned. It is just an absolute shortage across the state, and that's driving benefits up for these jobs. So I think previously the belief was you needed a 4-year degree to sort of be financially secure and support a family. But as uncomfortable as a conversation as it can be, entry level and skilled labor jobs are now an incredibly effective return on investment for workers who want to enter the workforce that way, versus sort of the ways that we've traditionally framed or pushed people toward.
Great. I want to go to Dane, but I just want to add kind of to put a button on this one. Again, with systems and programs like Stay to Stay, we were starting to develop the program based on industry need, and for the Bennington County, it was very much in alignment with the need specific to Southwestern Vermont. So, I think our hope is to continue with that kind of, again, more scalpel approach to onboarding potential workers. We were exploring healthcare and a hospitality service startup weekend. So, again, for the legislators that are on the call, as you continue to hear about this, whether it's a stay-to-stay program or kind of something that gets birthed out of it, I always go back to my marketing days saying, the best marketing companies in a downturn always market more. They know that. Coca-Cola spends more money in a depression than they do in good times. Why? Because this is when the battlefield is ripe for your message to get out there, because no one else can get it out there. So if we do have people paying attention to Vermont, I would just urge, as we look at possible other dollars, that now is the time to even put more money into marketing Vermont. And it doesn't just have to be tourism, to what Betsy was saying. It can be things like that stay-to-stay program that really target the 5 to 12 real needs that this economy needs, and then leave it to your partners to entertain those folks for either a digital weekend in Vermont or eventually a real weekend in Vermont. Dane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for all of the information that you're offering. I just want to say beforehand, I might cut out due to my internet connection. Usually it freezes for about 10 seconds, and then I can hop back on where I left off. So just giving you a heads up. So I've been really happy to hear from all of you, and mostly have wanted to just leave it to our current representatives. I'm just a candidate for Bennington District 2-1 for state rep.
That's where he hopped out. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds, Dane.
This is why we need broadband.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, you can hear me now. Good?
It's getting better.
Okay. I'm going to try to get through this quickly. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good.
Okay,
good.
I'm keep my video off.
Yep.
So I'm on one of the board members of Southwest Tech, formerly the Career Development Center. And I'm going to need cues to know that people can still hear me, unfortunately.
You're good to go, Dane. I'll let you know.
Okay, good. Thank you. As of last term, we were at about 80% enrollment, and now we're at about 120% applications. So there fortunately is an interest in the trades. But to look at entry level, I'm also interested in folks that are already here. And one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far due to our COVID conversations is looking at substance use disorder and how that has faced some real challenges as a result of COVID-19. A lot of people here are probably familiar with the hub and spoke model that we currently have for addressing substance use, specifically opioid use in Vermont. And they recently did an assessment that showed that it did have measurable progress on a lot of different levels, except on any change in vocation for participants. So I do see some opportunity there, and looking at sort of designating businesses as recovery friendly, which currently in Bennington County, we have about 40 businesses, if I'm getting that right. And then looking at the long game as far as making sure that people going through our K through 12 education are ready to get into the workforce, starting with early childhood development. So again, moving back to childcare, which we've all mentioned, and just looking at things like basic food and housing security so that Vermont.
Might have lost Dean at the end, but Betsy, I think you get the gist of where Dean was going.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we look at all of these populations that we need to bring into the workforce. I think many years ago, there was a notion that an employer would advertise for, you know, a worker, and, you know, 10 people would show up and they'd pick the best one. And if you didn't work out, they'd fire you and go to the next one. That can't happen anymore. We need everybody. And I think I know that employers are doing all sorts of things to try to accommodate people into the workforce. So if that's folks with, for instance, addiction issues, there are employers working through that. I've seen a lot of work with new Americans and understanding language barriers and understanding need and transportation. I mean, there's sort of the formidable four for all of our communities, but it's for our businesses as well, and that's transportation, that's childcare, that's housing, and that's substance abuse. And we've got to tackle all of those if we want workers to show up every day and keep coming to work, because we need them. So I think we're seeing a change in employers, and I think COVID is just going to highlight that even more.
Matt, I'd like to make a comment,
Absolutely,
if I may.
Mary. Yep.
I had a few years back been on a piece of legislation that I helped to co-sponsor in regards to families or individuals that are on even economic services in our state. I think if we started to look at programs that kind of were a step down type of program for folks that may be receiving assistance from the state, to be able to maybe start out in a part-time job, going to full-time, to however that works in getting it back into the workforce. Right now we have economic services that basically, if you go to work even part-time, you end up losing most all of your programming that you've had for whatever reason you're getting economic services for. If there was some type of a step down program that, you know, I think of, I'll use as an example, like say a single mom with several children and wants to get out possibly to, you know, work, obviously to enhance the family situation, is that maybe, you know, the single mom can work during the day when the children are at school. But if she goes, you know, if someone goes to do that, then they end up losing a great deal, if not all, of the services they're getting from the state. So if there was some type of a program that worked to say, yes, childcare would be provided or certain things would still be provided, but as you're working this adult into hopefully what will be a full-time position, you know, that there are some steps in place to make that happen. Because I think we've got some workforce folks out there that just, as I said, they don't have the incentive because they're afraid of losing what they've got and getting the services they're getting from the state right now. So if there was a way to work around that programming, I think we could enhance our workforce as well.
Yep. Great,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
think it's a huge issue. It's been a huge issue for a long time. And it's not that the issue isn't known, or that I see a lot of policy leaders, elected leaders who want to address that. It's just hugely complex. You know, it happens to me at least once a week where I have an employer say, what am I supposed to do? I'm trying to keep this person working for me. I've offered them a raise and they won't take the raise and they won't take the promotion. What am I supposed to do? How am I going to move that person up and bring somebody else in? So for a lot of times in the legislature, we have focused on wage levels or benefit levels, that mandating what employers must offer. employers are trying. But there are things that work that are counter to that. And so the question is, how does government and business work together in the best interest of that employee? And lots of things have been suggested. There's been lots of study.
Yeah, no, and I know that, and that's why I, if there was a way that we could work even stronger together to find some of those steps to go forward, would be, I think, beneficial. But we'll continue trying.
Great. And Betsy, we've got about 9 minutes left, and I have kind of a kitchen sink full of questions that are kind of all around, but I want to highlight some of them. And one is around Kathleen James's question about sole proprietors and kind of, new grants and how they've been entered back into those grants and what's the probability there. I think there's some questions around large scale events and will we ever get back to normal or anything like that, even within 2021. I think Michael Keene had a great question, a silver lining here in terms of innovation. And are you seeing anything across the state from certain businesses around how are they using COVID and this pandemic to innovate on their business? And then a back and forth, great little conversation between realtors and lodging, just around the policing that they're really having to do as people try to come up. And we were at a restaurant in Manchester last week, and they had to turn away 8 parties because I guess they didn't even bring masks. So I know that restaurants are also policing this, and I think I probably speak for many of those business owners. That's not what you got into the business for. So there's the kitchen sink.
It's called hospitality, right? The hospitality interest wants to welcome people and give you a good time and tell you, places to investigate and how to enjoy Vermont. And I think, we've certainly seen that in the chat here. It's, same with realtors. They're not technically in the hospitality business, but they're trying to help you become Vermonters, and we want that. And, COVID has turned many of our organizations, businesses into sort of regulators policing what is happening, and it's hugely difficult. And I worry about the long-term impact of that on all of our mental health. I worry about that as we move into the winter months with darkness more than light, with cold more than warmth. I worry about Vermonters, and I know that we're strong and that we can work together to power through, but it's much longer than anybody thought was necessary. You add to that your financial wherewithal, that this is, your personal economic well-being. Many businesses in Vermont, you are the business. You add that financial instability to this, and it's a mash of pain. And I think the thing that we can do is continue to keep moving forward in one step. Keep, to the extent that we get additional funding from the feds, being able to parse that out to businesses to help them bridge to the other side is really important. I think I tried to answer Representative James's question about the demand and grant funding in the chat. I just want you to know, if you go through that effort and you find that you still have, after the grants that you've already received, let's say $100,000 of unmet need, $200,000 of unmet need, the state only has so much. The first slog of money was done on a first come, first served basis. That is not the way they're doing it this time. They're collecting all, cutting off the applications, figuring out how much unmet need is, how much money they have, 77 million. They're going to do that percentage, and let's say that comes to 25%. Every application gets 25% of their unmet need. That's how this is going. The demand is absolutely going to outweigh supply, but it's going to be done differently. So that's that issue. I also put in a forecasting around events. You asked for my crystal ball. I'll tell you what I think. I think that's coming last. I don't think we're going to be gathering in large groups until we're in the clear. So that's what I think, and I think that's for two reasons: not only as a state and as a regulation, but also in individuals' comfortability. So much of this is about if we lift those things, whether we go to 100% for lodging or 100% for restaurants and retail, or we say you can gather in large groups. At some point, people have to feel comfortable going there. And there's also that emergence that we're talking about. There was it Mr. Keene? I just wrote down your last name in the chat. There was a discussion in there, a question about energy consumption and our carbon footprint. You know, it's interesting. I'm anxious to see the information here. So sending all these people to work from home, they're not commuting. Commuting's pretty big in Vermont. Is that a good thing? Or wait a minute, now I'm using heat 8 hours a day at home and electricity that I hadn't planned on. But is that better than the commuting that we do? Oh, you know, maybe because of our weatherization and because of our reduction of our carbon footprints in our homes, maybe that is better than transportation. I don't think we have the notion of that, but you save in one place, but you spend in the other. So I think that'll take some time for us to see the effort of that. So those are some of the questions, just trying to run through them rather quickly and answering those. I don't know if you have others right now about, you know, I think we've covered the grant programs, the federal relief that we do think is coming. I think it's going to take a little bit more. But if there's anything else, I'd be glad to.
Yeah. And I just want to mention, you know, I think like Betsy, the thing we kind of dance around and don't talk a whole lot about is the mental health of all of this, and what little bit this chamber can do. We've talked with our board, and we're going to start doing weekly digital business roundtables for industry sectors. And I'm not professing to be a mental health person. I think that's an opportunity for us to gather as much as we can, even on a digital space. We did those in the early part of COVID in March and April and May. We've got, you know, we had lodging hop on one week, we had retail hop on the next. We're hoping to roll out 5 or 6 of those with board members leading those discussions. So, you know, our board is made up of a collective of our membership. They are your leaders in each one of your industries. And I know they and my staff, you know, just have a heart for all of you going through all of this. Obviously, we're going through it too, but, you know, we kind of have a bird's eye view of all the pain points and challenges that you guys are going through. So we'll be sending out an email soon about those, and those are, you know, nothing very formal, just hopping on a Zoom call with myself, staff, some board directors, and then your industry, and having a conversation about what's happening next. And Brian, I don't know if you're still on the call, Brian Maggiato, who is the president of the board. Brian, any words you want to say either around that or just from today?
No, I mean, this is fantastic. Betsy, Charles, all of our legislators and senators, thank you very much for joining us today. You know, similar to what has been happening around the state, we all need to kind of look at each other, you know, as a region and find out exactly what's been working, what hasn't. We're all partners in this in the end. So knowing that your neighbor is doing all right, and if there are things that have worked well for them, being able to piggyback on them, you know, always helps. But to echo what Matt said, you know, now that things have started to slow down and people can start looking at their businesses again and a hope for, you know, a forecast towards the future, we're going to try and get back to the business to business model here in Bennington County and start to work with each other to create a support system that will ensure an economic vitality, you know, for the months to come as we enter into the cold winter, as they unfortunately put it. But everything that Matt and his staff have done through all this, you know, with communication, support, and outreach has been fantastic. And everybody on the call, you know, we can't thank you enough for the support you've shown this organization. It has definitely been a very long year, but I think that we have some really great opportunities on the horizon, and I look forward to working with all of you in the months to come.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I'll leave the last final words to Betsy and Charles. Just anything we didn't touch upon that you're hearing in other regions that may be something we want to pay attention to, or just ending on a positive note.
I think we see a lot of positiveness in people trying to figure out how to get through. And there is a little bit of hope out there. I feel confident that our federal delegation will help us and that our state legislators will understand the plight of business they already have. And so I feel very good about our representation. I would also let you know that we're doing a virtual policy series every Monday afternoon for the next several months. We have talked to Congressman Welch and Secretary of State Condos already. We'll have some discussions with other policy leaders coming up on various subjects. Unemployment insurance is next up. Next Monday, we'll be talking about energy and Act 250 and budget policy. So if that interests you, let us know. Thank you so much for having us.
Charles, any last words from you? Last words of wisdom heading into the cold winter.
Yeah, no, I think I just echo what Betsy said. I mean, to provide some level of comfort, I think, you know, our elected officials are acutely aware of the crisis at hand, and especially how it relates to businesses. And so folks have an ally in them, and I just encourage everyone to keep reaching out to us, to you, and to your elected officials, because there's a good community supporting you.
Right, and I did put into the chat, if you want to learn more about the Vermont Chamber or just get in touch with Betsy or Charles, you can absolutely go to their website, vtchamber.com, or just email us and we're happy to put you in touch with them. If you had a question that didn't get answered, or just want to connect with them offline on a question you didn't get a chance to ask. I want to thank everybody for joining us, especially the delegation and the candidates. You guys have a busy week ahead of you, as most of you are running. Best of luck for all of you. Don't forget to vote November 3rd. And again, thank you, Betsy and Charles, for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.